What's up, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of my little intro project thingy that I'm working on. I still haven't come up with a good name for this, but let's get started. If you missed the first 2 parts, I will link them in the description down below. Today we are going to paint our little mold title thing that we've created. We poured it out, we sanded it down. Now let's give it a nice paint job. We're going to have 2 spray paint nozzles come down, and they're going to weave back and forth. We'll paint this one my signature teal color, and then another one will come down and paint the letters purple. So let's get started by dropping down a network box. Add network box. We'll call this one spray paint. And to start out with, I think going forward, I will just make a proxy. And if you don't know what a proxy is, it's basically like a really low resolution geometry to represent your high resolution geometry, just so you don't have to wait for it to load. Because if you look at this mesh, let's see if we can click on it. If you look at this mesh, you can see there's a ton of detail in it, and it's kind of slowing down my computer. So I'm just going to make a quick proxy for scaling purposes, and just so we can get on with it. So let's drop down a geometry node, and we'll call this one proxy. And I'm just going to do a box, nothing complicated whatsoever. We'll bring this over, and I just want it to be the same size as this mold. It'll just make my life easier, and that's what we're all about, right? Making our lives easier. Okay, we'll turn this into a polygon mesh. We'll add lots of divisions because we will be putting on attributes, so we want lots of points. Let's say like 50 by 50 by 50, and that's going to load a lot faster. I'll just bring it into null so we can reference this. We'll call this out proxy. All right, let's hop up 1 level and let's create our spray paint nozzle. So I'll do a geo, and this will be our teal paint, spray paint. So we'll call this teal paint, and we can take off this geometry here. We got our proxy. We'll dive inside, and we'll start out with a tube. Make it a polygon. What's that? Just a ton of columns and rows. Add end caps. This is going to be like our pole that comes down, if you remember, our drills that came down in the previous tutorial. Same thing here. Increase the height significantly, just so we can't see the top. Raise this up. And I'll just make a simple spout here. Let's select our primitives. Do this middle part here. And scale this out. You know, nothing complicated. Now let's make a nozzle. Nice and skinny. Okay, it's as generic gets, but hey, we are in the visual effects field, not the 3D modeling field, so I think that will be just, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We can change it later. That's the beautiful thing about Houdini. You can change things without messing up the whole part. So let's call this out paint nozzle. So now we can proceed to transform this. I want it to start on the right side, about the center. Just kind of eyeballing it. So it's going to start on this side, it's going to come down, move over, and then get back up. So we need to figure out where our last simulation ended. I believe it was frame 120. Let me just check real quick here. Okay, yeah, so that's our drill. It goes up 120. 120 is where we are starting here. Go back in here. Oh, turn on our proxy. And so while our drill is raising up, we want our paint nozzle to come down. So let's go to 114, and we want it to start pretty high. Let's say 15. And then at 120, we want it to be back where we want to work with at 0. Then it's going to move. I want this to take about 1.5 seconds, so let's say 156. So at 150, we want it still at 0, and then at 156, we want it to go back up to 15. So let's make sure it works. It's coming down, it'll move over and then go back up. Now we can animate it moving over on the x-axis. So it comes down at 120. We have it here at 17.3 roughly, and it moves over to 150. Slide it over on the other side. Negative 17.3. Come down, move over, and move back up. All right, so now we want our paint nozzle to waggle back and forth, back and forth. We want it to cover the whole area because it wouldn't look that interesting if it was just stiff how it is now, just moving over. So I think what we can do now is do a little bit of an expression. Actually, well, so let me just quickly look at our animator editor. Okay, so let me just change our x-axis so it's a straight line instead of easing in and easing out. I'm sorry, that would have bugged me. So now we want it to waggle back and forth. We're going to do an expression on the z-axis here to make it waggle. So if you think back on your trigonometry class, I know it might have been a while ago, we have these 3 functions, and one of them is called sine, and sines waggle back and forth. Let me just very crudely explain what a sine is. So we have our graph here, we have a 1, and we have a -1. Let's add a little title, make it pretty, you know? And so as time goes along, our waves will go from 1 to -1, and 1 to -1, and so on and so forth. So we want our nozzle to animate along this sine. So we'll just do a very simple expression. We'll just type in sine and $F. So this $F, as you know, is a representation of what frame we're on. So now it's sine 120. And so let's hit play, see if it gives us the result it wants. Spoiler, it doesn't. So why doesn't it move? You need to times this $F by a number in order to influence a little bit more. So let's do a times 40. And check it out. It's going to go down, and it waggles back and forth. Just what we want. Ooh, I'm going to drop down another transform. It looks like doing our sine there moved things back on the 0 scale. So let's slide this over just a hair. That made our waves 40 times faster. It is actually doing the sine function that we want. So let me kind of explain this a little bit more. Over here. So we have our sine. This is our expression. $F. I'm sorry, I'm trying to draw this with my mouse and it sucks. Times 40. Not 46, 40. And this number here influences how fast the waves move. So we're doing from here to here 40 times. Before it was 0 times. So it wasn't even moving at all. It's not moving slowly. It was timesing it by 0. It's not going to give us any results that we want. So now it's moving up and down 40 times, but I want to increase the wave height. So we need to times it outside here. Let's try like times 5. Check it out. Almost. I think I'll times it by times 6. Just give it a little more height. Just make sure it goes from border to border. Perfect. So just to reiterate, when we times it by here, our times 6, this number right here, is our wave height. So we are timesing this wave height by 6. That's a good example of why using expressions like this is a really good way to get the animation that you're looking for. Unfortunately, as I was looking at this, we didn't keyframe to keep it at 0 while it was dropping down. So fortunately, I have to fix that real quick. Let's keyframe here at 120. This is our expression that we want. And at 119, we want this to be 0. Let me see if it, okay, so the whole time it's at 0. Let me change it at keyframe 1. So it drops down, it's not waggling back and forth. And we need to do the same thing at 150. Oh, we said 150. 150, we still want it here at this expression, still do the same thing, but then switch back to 0. Perfect, so we have our nozzle, it's animated now. I think we're good to make a pop network. So first we have to create an emitter. You may recall this from our grinding tutorial. I'm just going to do this little primitive right here at the bottom of the nozzle as our emitter. So let me select that real quick and we'll group that up. We'll just call this emitter and delete everything else. So we have our little primitive here. Let's connect it to a pop network. Dive inside. And if you remember from our grinding episode, our particles are just going to keep spawning right here and doing nothing, which is not what we want. We don't have any outside forces right now in our pop network. So let's dive in here. And let's take a look at what we have to work with. First, we want to work with our birth. This is our birth rate, which is seconds, and we want to work in frames, so I will make that 0. And then we have our impulse count, which is frames. So right now we want to start at 0. Let's see, at frame 120, it's going to start emitting, and let's keyframe this at 119. Then at 120, we want to drop down a ton of particles because it's a spray can. There's a ton of little paint droplets. And then we are going to go over to 150, and we want to still do 5,000. And then at 151, we want it to be back at 0. Now we can mess with this life expectancy. Right now it's living, our particles will live for 100 seconds, which isn't what we want. We could mess with that, or we can do a pop kill, which, let's do a pop kill because we haven't worked with that yet. Well, let's do our initial velocity. We want it to shoot a ton, and we want it to spread out pretty significantly. 75 by 75, 75. Let's do a pop kill. I've already decided. So a pop kill is basically like a bounding box, and it will just delete any particles that come into its vicinity. So if you see right here, we have a ton of particles raining down. That's not what we want. We want it to stop right when it figuratively collides with our object. So let's hop up one. If we look at our proxy, it looks like it lines up with our visual grid here. So we can just drop the pop kill right underneath that. Let's do a bounding, enable that. Move it down, negative 0.5. So our top of our bounding box lines up with the bottom of our grid. And then we can just, well, no, not by the Y. We can just increase this a ton and increase this a ton. So this will kill any particles that pass through it. Let's check it out. Oh, it looks like it continually... Looks like our particles just go right through. So we can drop down our size of our Y. Okay, so, well, yeah, that didn't work out too well. But this is why we try things out. So let's bulk this up, and we'll drop this down. I didn't know that, I thought that it just continually killed the particles. So this is a learning moment for me as well. So let's bring this up to the grid at least, right there. And then we will just decrease the lifespan so they die somewhere in this box and they don't continue to live. Under our birth, let's say like 0.25. We don't want it to live past that. Let's check it out. Okay, so it's just going to stop right there. Let's check our proxy. We can bump our pop kill up just a little bit more. All right, yep, I'm happy with it. We're gonna call it right there. So now let's save. We would hate for it to crash. Let's decrease the size of our P scale. If you remember from the grinding, we'll just drop down a simple Vexpression with an attribute wrangle, and we will lower the attribute of the P scale equal 0.01 semicolon. Let's save and render this out, see if that's the correct size that we're looking for. Okay, that looks like spray paint to me. I'm happy with it. And now here is where we will affect our color attribute, our CD. So we'll just drop down a color node, wire it in here, and I want my signature teal so we can actually reference colors from pictures. If we click on this box right here, we can click up here and we can upload any picture we want with our file explorer. Scroll down. I have my thumbnail here, and we'll click on this little eyedrop here and go to our signature teal. I am trademarking this color, not really. So we have our color attribute, and we want it to go onto our object to give the spray paint effect. So let's drop down our proxy via an object merge, not a marge. And we'll bring in our proxy. So we have our proxy, and let's do an attribute transfer, because we are transferring our color attribute onto our proxy. So we can take off the display flag here. Let's look at these. Geometry to transfer attributes to, that would be our proxy. Geometry to transfer attributes from, that would be our particles. Uh-oh. So as you can see here, it keeps our color attribute just fine until our particles pass through, and then it reverts back into its original color attribute that it was previously. So we're going to need to drop down a solver, and a solver is, if you remember, if you've seen some of my older tutorials, I talk about simulations versus animations, and simulations use the data from the previous frame to determine the attributes and the positions of the current frame. If that, I know I'm not explaining it that well, but basically this will help us keep our color attributes. So let's just make a solver. And our solver is basically like making our own popnet or our own dopnet. We're making our own simulation. So we can cut this out. We'll copy that later. And let's wire in our proxy with because that's our initial geometry, and then our color. And let's dive inside. So right here, input 1, that is our proxy that we have. That's our geometry. And input 2, that is our particles. So we don't have anything wired into input 3 or 4. We don't need them. That's fine. And we also have this dop import, which is the data of our previous frame right here. So right now, our previous frame is at 0. So we need to switch it over to 1 in order to bring in the geometry of our proxy. So we'll drop down a switch. And a switch just switches between different inputs. So say I wire in our previous frame and our input 1, we'll look inside, and input 0, this is our previous frame, input 1, this is our proxy. You can tell from this wire here which one is being displayed currently. This dotted one, we're not displaying our previous frame. If we go to input 1, no. We want input 1, so we want to show our object. So if we were starting the simulation first thing on our first frame, that would be fine. This is a perfectly fine setup, but we want it to load up on our frame 120. So we want to type in a quick expression. It'll be $FF. That is like so you have your frames, that accounts for like subframes and everything like that. And we're doing 2 equal signs, which is kind of saying is equal. You're making a statement, like this is a fact. It is equal to 120. So now we are saying bring in the data from frame 120 and start the simulation there. So now we can hop up 1. Let's copy our attribute transfer that we created, dive back inside, paste this, and we can do our geometry to transfer attributes to and from. So let's check it out. Ideally, it will keep its attributes after we paint it over. Perfect. Yep, that's what we want. So let me dive up 1. I'm going to mess around with this attribute transfer just a second longer so I don't have to keep popping in and out of this solver. Let's hit the display flag here, and we'll do our template on our spray paint. As you can see, our attributes are spreading way too fast. So let's adjust this a little bit. We'll just, it already by default transfers the CD attributes, but just in case if for future reference, if you're working with a different attribute, you type it in here. And we'll uncheck our primitives. We're working with a point attribute because if you look in our information tab right here, our CD attribute is a point attribute. So we're messing with that. So let's go with our conditions here. And I want to actually lower the distance threshold quite a lot. And let's bump up our blending because we are spray painting it. I kind of want a little bit of fading around the edges. So we'll just kind of lower the threshold, increase the blend. We'll just kind of get a nice sweet spot of where our particles are hitting. We also want to make sure that our particles thoroughly cover our object as well. So let's check it out right here. That should be pretty good. I'm gonna keep it right there. So we'll save this, and we can take off this, copy everything we have there, delete this, paste this, boom, boom. So do you see this orange bar on our timeline? That means that our current simulation, we made changes to it. It hasn't cached out. It's just going to be what it's already pre-done before. We want to reset the simulation. You hop up 1, hit reset simulation. You're good to go. Or you can go back to frame 1, in which case the timeline will also be blue. It's making a new calculation basically. So at the display flag there, check it out. Make sure that it covers the whole area. Looks like we got a little bit right here. I'm just going to bump up that blend just a little bit more. I think with our actual geometry we're going to be working with, that should be fine. Right there is just a little bit gray, but because around the edges is a lot thinner, I don't think you'll be able to tell. I think it'll be fine, and we can always go back and fix things in the future as we go along. So not a huge deal there. I think we're good to bring in our actual geometry to see how it looks now that I mention it. So we'll just drop down an object merge. And I think the last time we left off, it was in the grinding geometry. Out grinding, and we'll wire this guy in. It's going to take a lot longer than our proxy. Reset the simulation, and we'll just skip forward to 156, see if it covers the whole area. Boom. Awesome, I'm happy with it. Let's save. And now, since we are only displaying this object here, because it's wired right here in our initial geometry, we need to bring back in our nozzle and our colors. So let's drop down a couple nulls here just so we can keep track of everything. We'll call this out teal, not title, particles. And we will just merge everything back together. So we want our particles, we want our painting attribute and our geometry, And we want our nozzle back in here as well. Uh-oh. Okay, so actually I wired it into the geometry, but that was after it being transformed. This is why we need nulls to keep track of everything. We'll call this teal nozzle animated. And wire this in. We can cut this, if you hold Y, you can cut it with the scissors. And it should track with our particles just fine now, because it was after our transformed geometry. So now let's drop down a file cache just to try and make things run a little smoother. We'll call this teal paint and hit the save. All right, only took about a minute, not a big deal. We'll load from disk. And we'll just drop down a null. We'll call this, let's call this teal combined. So out teal combined. Perfect. So let's hop up one, and let's do something similar with the purple paint, but instead of doing a sign going across it, we just want to focus on these letters here. So let's just drop down a geometry. We'll call this purple paint. Take that, dive inside here. And we already created our paint nozzle. We already modeled that, so we'll just reference that. Under our teal paint, out paint nozzle. And we need to look at where our letters are for our actual mold. So we'll bring that in. It'll take a little while, but that's okay. Okay, so now I want to animate our little paint nozzle here. We want it to drop down when the other one's dropping up. We'll have it start at the M, and we want it to track with the letters. So let me just transform our nozzle. It's very similar to the teal one. We'll have it drop down. So our teal one goes up at 150, and it's completely up at 156. So we'll have this one start coming down at 150. We'll have this be on 15 on the Y scale, on the Y axis, and then at 156, we'll have it drop down. It's probably going to be a little more now that I think about it, because I want it to be closer to the letters, yeah. So let's slide this over. Oh my gosh, my computer's so slow. All right, we have it right here, right in position at -5. So if we click on our transform at 150, we have it at 15. And then at 156, it's going to drop down at -5. I also want this one to last about a second and a half, so to frame 192. So at 186, we will be done spraying this. We'll keep it at -5. And then at 192, we'll have this hop back up to 15. So now we want to create a chops network, similar to our grinding that we did before. So I think we'll hop up one and create a path. Let's go to our top view. We could take off our purple paint. Let's just look at our grinding for a second. And path. So we'll just follow along the letters right here. And press enter. We are done. Let's go back to our perspective view. And it made all these nodes for us. So let's collapse this into one network box. We'll just go to add network box. We'll call this paint path. And similar to the grinding, we'll just use our constraints shelf tool here, our follow path. Let me display the nozzle once more. Hop up one, and we want it to follow path. And select path object. That's our path 4. Enter, look at, none, look up, none. So we have our constraints network right here. And if you recall, we need to adjust it accordingly. So at 156, it's going to drop down at 0. Oh, no, let's just delete all keyframes. 0. And then at 186, we want it to be at the end. You can see that it's going all over the place. We need to move centroid to origin before we mess with any more. And it's already been keyframed back at -5 for us. And it'll fall along the path as we go. Let's hit play. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead and we'll just do a very similar thing to the teal paint. I think we are good to actually copy all of that. Let's bring this in. Let me just take off the display on all these points and paths. They're just kind of annoying. In our teal, we have pretty much a good job there. Copy that. Dive in here and paste. The only thing we need to change is our emitter right here, our group. We need to redo that because it's a different primitive number. So let's select our transform right here, select here, we'll group this. The delete is already set with the name emitter, so we will just reuse that. Then it right here. Pop network, but we need to change just a couple things in this case. Let's hop in here. I don't want it to spread quite as much. Let's say something similar to 40, 40, 40. So we do need to affect when it is emitted. Let's go to our birth tab here. We can deselect this with Control Shift and left click, and then we don't want this one to start until 156. So at 155, we'll keep this at 0, 156, back up to 5,000. Does its thing at 186, keep it at 5,000, and 187, go to 0. I don't think it'll pass through the pop kill. Let me just check real quick. Nope, okay. Do a P scale, do a color. Let's change this color. I drop purple. And let's just merge everything back together because we are only looking at our particles right now. So let's do our merge and our paint nozzle here. Okay. Now you're probably wondering why we don't do the color attribute transfer onto our object right now in this geometry that we have here. And the reason is because our chop network will affect anything in here. So it will be moving around our mold and that won't give us the result that we want. So we're going to have to bring the teal and the purple together, and then when we are doing it, when we are combining everything in that geometry, we'll transfer the attributes there. So we're going to delete this reference, object merge, and just drop down a null. Call this out purple paint. So let's do one more geometry. In this case, we'll call this paint combined. So now let's bring in our two object merges. Or I typed in object merges. And then let's find our teal paint and our purple paint. Out purple paint. And where's our teal paint? Out teal combined. So in our teal combined, we only want the purple paint to affect our font. So we're going to need to separate them before we apply that attribute. We'll just do a group. So we'll go to our front view and we'll just select our font. Group this up. and I will call this one font. And we will do 2 delete nodes. 1 deleting the font and 1 leaving everything but the font. So here we have our font. This is what we want to plug into our solver. So we want our initial geometry, do this guy. And I'll just copy everything that I've already created in the teal. Remember to change the switch because ours doesn't happen until 156 is the magic number. And let me just make sure that it spreads okay. I just want it to make sure that it covers all of the letters just fine. Oh, okay, so we ran into another issue here. You can see that our nozzle, it goes down and goes back up. It doesn't follow our constraint network. I guess that's not transferred over. So we can just go here and hit the transform object, and let's transform into our path 4. It should follow okay now. There we go. Okay, so it's tracking. Let's hit the display flag here. You can see that it's having an issue covering the area. Let's just kind of cheat and widen that up a lot more. Okay, that looks like it covers everything just fine. Let's go ahead and merge everything together. See what it looks like all combined. All right, so it looks like we run into another issue, yet another one. As you can see, we have our blue, our teal paint goes across, but we can't see our purple one. It's nowhere in sight. So we actually need to switch between 2 inputs because this one doesn't start until 156. We want to see what is displayed after the 156 because that's all being blocked off. Right now we're only seeing the teal paint. So up here on the object level, we'll just drop down another switch. And this guy. So let's check out our inputs. We have our input 1 and our input 0. Our input 0, so it's right there. We can see it at 156. We want to see the input 0. Well, let's say at 155, we want to see the input 0, but at 156, we want to start seeing our paint going on. So we'll hit the display flag on that. So it'll switch between the 2 displays. And now we'll see what happens after frame 156. Good. I'm also not seeing our paint particles in our paint nozzle. Let's just merge that one back in there. And we can take off our display flag there. I'll just drop down a quick file cache and get this saved out, and then I'll do a little flipbook so we can see in real time the progress that we're making. In hindsight, this does seem a little bit fast. My main issue was making my intro for my videos a little too long, so I thought that 10 seconds was a good time frame. Maybe this will look better once it's all complete. Right now it does seem a little bit too quick for me, but we'll tackle that problem as we get to it. That should be it. I had a lot of fun figuring this one out. I'm really happy with this project. I think it's really starting to come together. It's really I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess I'll say. So if you have any questions or suggestions for me, like maybe you would have done this spray paint effect a little bit differently than I did, I would love to hear how you would go about doing this effect, because we're all just trying to learn together, and I think we should all just be helping each other. So maybe if you have any questions or suggestions on your own projects, I'd be happy to take a step away from this, and maybe you and I can tackle it together and figure out how to things are done. Let's get a real community going here. So I appreciate you guys watching. In the meantime, be well. I'll talk to you later. Bye.